Hare Krishna. We're celebrating this year the 56th anniversary of the incorporation of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. On July 13th of 1966, Srila Prabhupada was able to incorporate the Society of ISKCON in New York City, New York, in America. This was after many, many years of struggling. In 1922, when he met his spiritual master encouraged him to preach in the English language. It would benefit both him and everyone who met him. In 1933, Prabhupada accepted formal initiation from his spiritual master. And then again, to reinforce those instructions originally given just a fortnight before Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati disappeared from this world, he reiterated the exact same instructions to preach Krishna consciousness in the English language. Srila Prabhupada was thinking, let me try. So after 1936, he first established the English printing in New Delhi of the Back to Godhead magazine. That was his first attempt. Then he began writing books. Then, in 1953, he established what he called the League of Devotees in Jhansi, UP. The League of Devotees had a prospectus, and in this prospectus, there were points that Prabhupada wanted to accomplish with this society up to Q, from A to Q. That's quite a lot of points. Prabhupada was very ambitious to fulfill the instructions of his spiritual master and carry out the desire of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to spread the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra all over the world. But in Jhansi, he met with not the success that he was expecting. So he tried to cooperate with his godbrothers, but they were not interested in preaching outside of India. So Prabhupada then realized he'd have to go on his own. He printed the first 3 volumes of Srimad Bhagavatam, and then in August of 1965, he came to America. He first stayed at the home of some very nice, pious people, though they were meat eaters. He realized he wasn't going to be able to accomplish much there. So he went to what he considered the most important city in the world, which was New York City. And he hoped to establish Krishna consciousness there. He first stayed with an impersonalist yogi, and then finally in February of 1966, he went to stay in the Lower East Side in the Bowery of New York City, where there were many young people seeking spiritual guidance. So Prabhupada, with the assistance of these young boys and girls in New York City, he was able to contact a lawyer, Mr. Stephen J. Goldsmith, through the assistance of one of his students, Carl Jurgens. Mr. Goldsmith was very interested. He was actually infatuated with the idea of establishing a religious society in America that centered around the teachings of a Swami from India. So Prabhupada gave him the prospectus of the League of Devotees, and from that, Stephen Goldsmith and Srila Prabhupada, they took the essence of those A to Q principles, and they made particular principles in order that Prabhupada could get a chartered religious society within the state of New York. Prabhupada's main principles were he wanted to propagate and educate people about the principles of Bhagavad-Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, and he wanted to do this by holding meetings, by printing books, and by creating centers, particularly centers of the pastimes of Lord Krishna that he called places of pilgrimage. So when Srila Prabhupada finally was able to accomplish getting the charter of his International Society for Krishna Consciousness, he only had a fledgling following. It was in July, finally, On July 11th, Mr. Goldberg came to one of Prabhupada's Bhagavad-Gita classes at 26 2nd Avenue. Prabhupada saw him sitting very peacefully cross-legged at the door, and Prabhupada introduced him to the congregation of the young men and women who were listening to the class. Mr. Goldsmith stood, and he showed that he had this constitution, the Incorporation of ISKCON. So Prabhupada called for members at that time. 11 trustees signed the papers, some of them without even reading it, simply because they had faith in Srila Prabhupada. One of the original signers, who helped Srila Prabhupada so much from the early days up until now, that was Mr. Michael Grant, who became Mukunda Das, and his to-be wife, Janaki, Jan, who's the older sister of Jamuna Devi. He signed without even reading the papers. They considered this to be a fancy of the Swami, because at this point, there was just one small center. He only had a handful of followers. But Srila Prabhupada was thinking worldwide. Actually, he was thinking galactically. How ISKCON would be able to change the face of the earth and turn unlimited number of people into Krishna conscious devotees. So 10 years later, after the chartership of ISKCON, Srila Prabhupada, with all of his wandering and establishing temples around the world, 108 temples, he came back to New York City for the first Rath Yatra down Fifth Avenue. That was the 10th year anniversary of the incorporation of ISKCON. And Prabhupada said at that time that this ISKCON is like Lord Varaha, because Varaha, he came out as a very tiny creature from Lord Brahma's nose. And then he expanded and expanded and expanded and became cosmically gigantic. So in the same way, ISKCON started very small in a storefront in New York City, July 13th, 1966. And from there, this ISKCON has expanded all over the world with millions of people chanting Hare Krishna and following the principles that were originally set down in this constitution of the incorporation of ISKCON. So we're all very fortunate to be able to assist Prabhupada in any way in carrying on his vision of how the entire world can be made Krishna conscious by the chanting of Hare Krishna, with following the four regular principles, and accepting the religious principles established by Sri Krishna in Bhagavad-Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam.
Hare Krishna. So we're very happy to be part of the anniversary of the incorporation of ISKCON in New York. Srila Prabhupada didn't even have any followers then. Even he didn't know. He had to sign people up and right on the spot, and they became the incorporators. And he started his mission. If you've ever been to 26 2nd Avenue, you'll be surprised how small the place actually is. And from this tiny place, Prabhupada inaugurated a movement that has spread all over the world, that has so many huge temples glorifying Prabhupada and glorifying Lord Chaitanya and Lord Sri Krishna. And one of my favorite stories about the old New York temple, because I was sent to get trained up in Los Angeles. And one of the devotees, first devotee I met was a devotee named Mahapurush, who was one of the original devotees from 26 2nd Avenue. And he told me that they used to serve out prasadam every day around noon. And everybody knew about it. So people would come, and Swamiji would sit there, because they called him Swamiji at that time, and direct the serving. And everyone would sit and take prasadam, some rice, some spicy soup called dal, and some funny breads called chapati. And everybody would take prasadam, and Prabhupada would direct the serving, and he would sit there with everyone. So one day Mahapurush, he just happened to stay beyond the limit. And because it was just so nice sitting there with Prabhupada. So suddenly he realized that only he and Prabhupada were sitting in the room. Everybody had left. It was just so nice sitting there with Prabhupada. And he saw that people were just hippies. What to speak of wash their hands? They didn't even wash their plates. They just threw their plates in the sink and walked out the door. And he began to see all these dirty plates, and he saw all these dirty pots, and he thought, well, somehow these pots get cleaned every day. Somehow these plates get cleaned every day. And I'm not usually here. There's only one other person in this room who could be doing it. So he started to pick up all the dirty plates and pots, and Prabhupada smiled. And he said, I was just praying to Krishna, to someone to please kindly help me. So this was the humility of Srila Prabhupada. He was trying to bring the highest message of love of Godhead from Lord Chaitanya to the most degraded population in the world, people on Lower East Side of New York. And he was so humble that he was willing to cook for them, he even have to clean for them. This was Srila Prabhupada's unbelievable mercy. Nobody has known the meaning of Mahaprabhu's words. Trinadapi sunechana, tarorapi saishnana, amanina manadena, kirtaniya sadahari. Srila Prabhupada is the personification of this verse of Shikshastakam. So we want to remember this on this holy inauguration of the Incorporation of ISKCON in New York. Hare Krishna.